Well, Dr. Ershaghi, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Coffee and Compliance is, I guess, the title of this Advisors Corner, featuring a conversation that is probably in everybody's minds these days, how to consider ethics, specifically sexual harassment, at the workplace, and wanted to get your feedback as to what you're seeing in the form of regulations, proposed rules, or enforcements by agencies, and how is that impacting companies, particularly within the financial space?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here. And I think that the historical knee-jerk reaction to harassment, discrimination, and specifically sexual harassment violations has been more of a reactionary posturing, especially when you look at the financial services and insurance industry. In terms of legislation and regulation, organizations have enforcement policies, so they're looking to revise and simplify their policies so that the guidelines are clear and concise. But translating those policies into understandable decision-making points is where there's a gap. And organizations, if you look at a lot of the infractions and the violations that are occurring, the policies are in place, the codes and the guidelines are in place, but the workforce is actually looking at the pillars of the culture, the corporate culture, to really understand what is truly acceptable behavior. So what I'm seeing from an industry perspective is that policies and legislation and rules alone are not having the impact.
And so, obviously, being that you talk to a lot of organizations in the financial insurance space and others, of course, what are you seeing? Are you seeing still a defensive posture? Is that changing now to one that's proactive? And what role does training play? And are organizations really waking up to this? And what are you seeing from a change in 2018?
Yeah, so I would say in the last 2 decades, training has always been a crutch. Training was, compliance was more an administrative function to demonstrate that training was administered, completed. The organizations demonstrated 100% compliance, and we've kind of had a one-directional conversation around the rules and the guidelines. I think that the last 3 to 5 years we're seeing a significant shift, primarily due to a few factors. Number one, trust is severely broken within corporations, within industries, really even government. Number two, trust in leadership specifically is really being tested. And so when you look at typically the pillars of an organization that demonstrate what is acceptable behavior, what are the right choices, how do we do business? If you look at the patterns of some of the headlines recently, there were a lot of decisions that sometimes were legal but not the right thing to do. So rules alone, again, need to work in concert with training, and training alone does not work if it's only done one-directionally. So what organizations are doing today is they're not merely training on, let's say, the topic you said, sexual harassment, but they're going beyond the training. And they're doubling down on education that is more communicative. So how do we put leaders at the forefront of the conversation? Think of it like brown bags, town halls, manager-to-manager peer group experiential discussions. Organizations are also trying to focus on taking real-life cases that have unfolded in their companies. I've seen this with quite a number of our insurance clients and banking and financial tech clients, and they run internal communication blogs around what were they thinking. And they show sanitized cases of decision-making or decision points, and they demonstrate how the issue unfolded, the gray areas. They apply the policy or the guidelines, and then they demonstrate how the organization took action, whether it was termination or whether it was coaching, further education, or some policy change. I think that organizational transparency and organizational justice is another factor. And what I mean by that is if you look at a lot of the rule of the policies right now, especially when you look at the federal sentencing guidelines for organizations, there are elements, 7 elements that are required. An anonymous hotline. We need to ensure that employees receive adequate training, they understand the code, et cetera, et cetera. But even if you have platforms for employees to speak up and to report misconduct, in my experience of, I would say, over 2 decades now, we tend to find that the workforce is not comfortable speaking up or speaking out and reporting misconduct if they feel that the procedural justice is not there.
Very good. Drawing a parallel with cybersecurity over the past, I would say, 10, 15 years as I was working in that space, it originally was very much an IT conversation that started and stopped within information technology. Best case scenario got into the risk officer. But eventually, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen that conversation escalate into boardrooms and turn into more of a business discussion. And so, as we're looking at the financial sector and insurance companies, has that conversation started to escalate from one of being not just an operational issue, but that one that impacts reputation and the bottom line? You've seen that?
Absolutely, absolutely. The headlines are confirming it, and certainly the conversations I'm having with organizations in financial technology and insurance. Accountability is the number one theme. If I had to kind of select where's the trend going in 2018, leadership accountability, how the board and the senior executive team plays a very integral role in moving a compliance culture forward. So it's no longer that compliance is relegated to kind of a check the box once a year activity that you complete 30 days, a couple training courses. The compliance officer is now playing a more prominent role. We are seeing, from a best practice standpoint, more independence for the compliance officer to report directly to the board.
I see. Yep. And that gives them an independent voice and an independent set of decisions to make, as opposed to being a subset of a line of business.
Line of business. And even when you look at some of the, again, recent headlines, both, I won't name organizations, but you'll see that in some cases, the general counsel had been appointed as the compliance officer, which develops an inherent conflict because the general counsel is essentially the chief legal officer of the organization. He or she is tasked with defending and protecting the organization and advancing the business forward, whereas the compliance officer is actually in place to create a line of independence and to protect and defend the workforce and to ensure that ethical violations and reports of misconduct are adequately and fairly, equitably investigated. And so that's where you're seeing kind of a bifurcation of this role and more independent reporting at the compliance level.
Very interesting. I think that seems to be, at first, a costly change, but it seems like on the long run it's going to actually help both on the bottom line and from a reputational perspective. It's an investment companies need to make.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, again, brand reputation, I think there's, again, a number of examples. It's not hard to find how organizations' brands, you're seeing currently some associations are disassociating themselves from other commercial brands and vice versa due to politics, decisions of CEOs, workforce misconduct, and so forth. So the bottom line does matter. Ethical decisions are impacting the bottom line, and no longer is the decision of the individual pointed to the fact that the individual is like, well, this individual made a decision behind closed doors in their personal life. It doesn't affect our business. It wasn't in relation to business. You are seeing the lines very blurred. And you're seeing also that organizations are trending in the direction of looking to recruit and develop leaders that are not only being held accountable for the culture of the company, but they're doubling down and investing on what does a leader mean in terms of developing or building a business that is not only, obviously, businesses are a business for profit, but profits with purpose. So what are the values that we're putting into action to run our business, and how do we demonstrate that through our leadership team?
Very good. Well, thank you so much for your insights, and appreciate it, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks.